Thank you very much for attending this second meeting of the current season. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Gregg Redner to talk to us this afternoon. He's not from Belgium, he's from Canada, and he's the president of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. He's obviously a very distinguished musician and been a keen philatelist for very many years. It also gives me an opportunity to welcome, really, participation from the Royal of Canada, who will also be taking part for the first time in the Royal Challenge later on this month, when we have an all-ladies team from the Royal of Canada showing their exhibits at the Royal between the 23rd and the 25th. So something to come and look at Abchurch Lane. And as a taster for Canadian philately, it's over to Gregg and to look at this particular stamp of Belgium and its significance. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to just put this in context a little bit. I am fascinated with the Belgian issues of post-World War I. And this program goes partly, grows from that, and also grows from my role as president of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. One of the things we hear all the time is from younger collectors and people who are getting into the hobby, there's nothing left to study. In Canada, the small queens and large queens are, have been studied for decades, and what can you say about those? So I'm very much interested in pursuing topics that are left to show people that there actually are some things to be said about this. So that's where this program comes from in terms of the genesis. First of all, I'd just like to bring greetings from the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, the British North American Philatelic Society, Postal History Society of Canada, and the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada. Philately is alive and well in Canada, and I bring greetings from all of these organizations on their behalf. So one of the things that fascinates me about philately is points of transition. Times when cataclysmic events are ending and new ages are dawning. And of course, the end of World War I is a perfect example of that. Why does this interest me? Well, first of all, things tend to be very fluid during these periods. Change is often necessitated by need, as we're going to see today. Resources are stretched. Countries are trying to recover financially and corporally from the period of war. The solutions that are undertaken to meet the needs are very often surprising. And these solutions are often necessitated by the need for speed to be able to solve a problem. So rush solutions often lead to inferior results. Inferior results, for me, make for interesting philately. And it's a challenge to write about inconsequential matters. So that's why this topic today I find particularly interesting. A little bit of background in case you're not currently up on on Belgian history. Albert I was the king of the Belgians from 1909 to 1934. He was the third king following Leopold I and Leopold II. The death of the only son of Leopold II, who was Albert's older brother, placed Albert in direct line to the Belgian throne. I'm 6'8", so I'm always fascinated with tall historical figures. So this is more a self-indulgent little digression here. He was very well educated, especially in the area of science, but he was also extremely tall and was quite shy. He'd studied naval construction and engineering in the UK and England. Prior to World War I, Albert I was concerned about the size of the Belgian army. It had been fixed at 350,000 men, which was more of a defensive force. And the size of the force caused him to realize that they really needed to assume a position of neutrality. July the 31st, 1914, as tensions continued to escalate across Europe, Albert sent the German emperor a letter reminding him that Belgium was a neutral country. It didn't seem to do much good, because on August the 2nd, the Germans massed on the eastern border of Belgium and demanded free passage through the country to attack France from the north. You can see the line here. Liège was the city that stood between the German invasion and the rest of Belgium. And Albert famously made the following reply when it was demanded that the German army be allowed to pass through the country. He said, "I govern a nation, not a road. The answer is no." At which point the German army invaded from the east, and the Great Battle of Liège took place. And some historians believe that the 10-day battle slowed the German army down enough, heroic battle to prevent them from occupying the country and slow them down, prevented them from being able to make quick passage into France, and gave the French the chance to set up slightly better defenses, which of course resulted in things bogging down in the south of Belgium and the north of France for the remainder of the war. This is just a quick to show you the advance of the army after they had succeeded in taking Liège. Throughout the war, up here, if you can see my cursor, up here in this corner, there remained a few square miles of free Belgian soil, which never fell into German hands. And Albert spent a good deal of time in that area. He tried very, very hard to not leave the country more than was necessary, and he would very often be found at the in the Belgian trenches, as this picture demonstrates. In 1918, he took charge of the general offensive, retook Ostend and Bruges. He also was very interesting in that following the war and the triumphal return of the royal family into Brussels, he also enacted some very progressive social reforms, including the introduction of universal suffrage, effective equality of the two national languages, Dutch and French, and the switch to teaching in Flemish at the University of Ghent, the recognition of trade union freedoms, and the extension of social legislation. Sadly, he died tragically during a fall practicing his favorite sport, which was mountaineering. There always have been conspiracy theorists who have suggested that he was pushed. Obviously, that's never been proved one way or the other, but he died in 1934 and was so popular that thousands of the veterans of the front marched with his casket to his final resting place. So the 1915 King Albert I stamps were issued by the Belgian government in exile. Their production resulted from the fear that the current 1912 Pellens issues, which you see on the screen behind the text bubble, would be misused by the occupying Germans. So they were demonetized, and the new stamps were issued. The 1915 King Albert series of stamps includes 7 definitives and 7 commemoratives, not including the stamp that we're going to talk about today. They were issued in 1915, and I know that some people will disagree with this statement, but they are to Belgium what the small queens are, say, to a country like Canada. The 1915 issue itself has been studied, especially the definitives have been studied in very great detail. The stamps that I find interesting are the ones on the middle row. These three on the left were the first of a series of stamps that Belgium issued that featured cities that had been devastated by the German army, and they would be followed by stamps that would come out in the next couple of years. On the bottom left, second from the left and on the right, is one of the mistakes of Belgian philately. You can see that they're listed as Frank and Franken under the 5. And this is one of the slightly rarer stamps from this issue. The stamps of the 1915 Albert I issue were engraved by MacDonald in Antwerp the previous year, printed by Waterloo and Sons. They served until 1935 when they were demonetized. The issue was printed by typography. It was perforated 14 by 14, and the stamps were printed in 4 panel sheets of 100 stamps each, arranged 10 by 10. An indeterminate number of each of the definitives was produced. The printing of the issue was a direct reaction of, now we're talking about the 3-cent Albert I issue, and I would like to state unequivocally, this issue was released, as you'll see, on the 30th of January 1920. So when I put that this was the 1921 issue, in essence, I've always thought of it that way. But obviously, if we're going to be nitpicking, which I think as philatelists we are, it should be the 1920 King Albert issue. And thank you to several people who've brought that up. I also collect imprimé or printed matter mail from Belgium, and I'm working on an exhibit of that. The issue with this was that the printed matter rate was being raised on January the 1st, 1921. This was the second increase in the imprimé rate, which had taken place in 2 years. Now, the imprimé rate, or the Druckwerk rate, was for printed commercial mail, postal wrappers, postcards with 5 or fewer words on them, and calling cards. There's nothing particularly remarkable about this card, just to show you an example of the stamp on appropriate mail. So following the secession of World War I, the Belgian government lowered the printed mail rate from 5 cents, which the Germans had opposed in January of 1918, to 1 cent. This was done almost immediately after the war was finished. The German rate had been considered punitive, so the decision to lower the rate back to pre-war 1 cent levels was clearly designed to show good faith on the part of the Belgian Postal Authority. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the King Albert I 1 centime issue, which would have served in this capacity. Now, this is one of the things that fascinates me about this particular stamp. Of course, the country was completely devastated. Forget the rest of the infrastructure. When the Germans invaded, anything that could be useful in the administration of the postal service was destroyed to prevent it from falling into German hands. So the postal service was largely building from scratch. So because of the financial pressures that were exerted on them, they needed to rebuild the service immediately following World War I. And so by 1919, they realized they had to raise the rate. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the 2 cent King Albert I, which would have been used for this purpose. The final increase came on January the 1st, 1921, when the rate was raised to 3 cents. This was not viewed positively by the public, and especially by business owners. And there was quite a bit of discussion about this in the newspaper. The 3 centime charge for the imprimé rate put Belgium in a difficult position because they had never produced a 3 centime stamp before. And in the upper right-hand corner of this, you can see what would have been the result of not producing the stamp. There would have been a need to use the 1 and 2 cent to justify this. The rate, because of the public outcry, the rate remained unchanged until October 1925, in spite of the fact that pressure continued to mount financially on the Postal Authority. This stamp in the catalog of Belgium is numbered 183, and as we say, it was the first 3 centime stamp. Because, for reasons that you'll see momentarily, there are no proofs for this issue, but I do have a nice typographic print of the original effigy, which is printed in a large frame on a black and white paper. And of course, this is the image that was used for the 1915 Albert I issues. So the stamps were designed, as we said, by Waterloo, and they were engraved by Waterloo. They were printed on thin white paper. They can also be found on a thick yellowish paper or on a light gray paper. The last two are considered quite rare. The right-hand side of the image you see below has the thick yellowish paper. I've seen 3 copies of this, and they're all consistent in terms of their color. So it's not a changeling. It's not a result of being exposed to the sun. So there are a very limited number of this issue that are printed on that paper. It's used a wide variety of gum, from glossy yellowish to white matte gum. The stamps were perforated, as with the rest of the issue, 14 by 14. But my research has also found perforations that are 14 by 13 and a half. And 14 by 13 3/4. As you can see below, they exist in a wide variety of shades. The 2 stamps on the outside, the tan and the left, which is characterized as black-gray, are quite rare. So the rate was designed to carry printed matter weighing up to 25 grams. And the new stamps were given royal and ministerial approval on December the 15th, 1920, and they were placed on sale on December the 30th, 1920. The stamp on the right, and I know we have a slightly different feeling in North America about philatelic usages than occurs in Europe. This is clearly a philatelic usage. But it includes 4 3 centime and 4 2 centime stamps. This is a first day of use cancel. And so, philatelic or not, it's one of the rare first day examples. Why was this rare? Well, they went on sale on the 30th. The 31st, of course, was New Year's Eve, which was a holiday, and the January the 1st was also a holiday, New Year's Day. And so it's very difficult to find these stamps in early usages, especially this first day. You can see that this one was canceled between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't been able to find any thing regarding this, but my sense is that they were not they may not have been put on sale until late in the day, because all of the very limited uses I found on the December 30th tend to be postmarked late in the day. The issue needed to be produced quickly and expediently. As we said, the decision to raise the rate was done rather quickly. So for this reason, the decision was made to use the existing plates, plate 2 from the King Albert I issue, to print this new issue. Because the plates had been in use since 1915 and had printed, plate 2 had printed a copious number of stamps. It was in very poor condition. So the quality of the 3 centime was questionable from the very beginning. And I've just chosen 4 random stamps to show you how, just if you look at the frame lines around the outside, you can see that this plate was pretty well degraded by the time it was used, which makes for fascinating collecting. As with the early 1915 Albert I issues, it was produced in 4 panels of 100 stamps. This is actually quite a rare example of 2 panels joined together by the interpanneau, and there are not a lot of these to be found, and so I was very happy to find this. The sheet of 100 of the Albert I 3 centime. This is also not something that one can find very easily. I have 2 collections of these. One is an Eastern, or 2 examples of these. This is the straightforward stamp, and the other is an Eastern Canton overprint, which is even rarer. In order to preserve the rapidly degrading plates, Jubilee lines were introduced, that heavy black line around the outside of the frame. This 3 centime stamp is the first stamp in Belgian philately that made use of Jubilee lines, of course, which were designed to take the pressure off the outside row of stamps to prevent the frames from degrading further. Now, these markings, which probably seem inconsequential, are the depot markings that show the year that the stamps were delivered and deposited in the treasury before they were sent out. These are actually some of these are quite rare, and I'm going to show you a number of different varieties of these. The marking at the top is a forma called Depot A, and as you can see, it was used on the issue from the very beginning, so not exclusively just for the 1920 or 21 issue. Depot B with the double lines around the outside, 1919 to 1922. Depot C, again, 1919 to 1922. And Depot D, which I have only been able to find on this issue. So it may have been created, others may have information on this. It may have been created originally to mark, to record the depositing of this in the treasury for this issue. The Levesque catalog contains hundreds of variations that can be found on these stamps, and they're very minuscule and very interesting. But the primary varieties that are recognizable are the 3 that I'm going to show you. The first is known as the BE variety, variety 1. You can see that the letters in BEL of Belgium are compromised by excessive use. There's the B variety, where just the B is something has gotten wedged in a bit of off the side, and making the B appear slightly deformed. And then there's the variety in the bottom country marking, which is known as the Relgi variety, because the B has been fractured and the ink has gotten in and makes that B look like an R. Those are the principal major varieties. And then on the top, there's also a broken arcade variety at the top. And this appears on a couple of stamps in the series. After World War I, the Eastern Cantons, which were the countries that had been taken by what was not then Germany at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, were reclaimed by Belgium. And so you get a series of what's called Eastern Canton overprints. This is the general one, which was overprinted to indicate that these stamps were going to be used in former German territory. But you also find specific ones from Malmedy. Malmedy, of course, is famous in World War II history as the site of the Malmedy massacre, which happened during the Battle of the Bulge, when the retreating German troops were unable to move fast enough with their prisoners of war, and so a group of American soldiers were gunned down in the forest at Malmedy. Certainly not the only time that this happened on either side, but the most famous example. And then there's the Eupen variety, which is another canton. This is a large panel of these, but I also have a 100-sheet variety of this overprint, and I love the slight fold in the middle of this, which makes for some kind of interesting varieties. Printed pre-cancels can also be found, primarily for Antwerp, Brussels, Ghent, and Liège, but there also are later pre-cancels for some smaller cities. I show examples of 1921 and 1922, but I also recently found an example of a 1920 Brussels pre-cancel. Very strange that they would have had a pre-cancel for 1920, specifically because the stamp would have only been used for one day, and then that pre-cancel would no longer have been able to be used. So I think it's quite rare, but it does exist. They're wonderful double strikes, or these are roller pre-cancels. So I often wonder what was happening while they were rolling these on, especially the one on the right, where you get the A and B variety of the pre-cancel rolled up and down. As we all know, Belgium is one of the beer capitals of Europe, and so maybe this happened after lunch and too much good Belgian beer was consumed, but regardless, they're fascinating. So what could these be used for? They could be used for postal wrappers, and we'll look at this first. A postal wrapper would have carried a newspaper, a journal, a newsletter, sometimes catalogs from specific companies. They're the hardest to find because, of course, postal wrappers, there's no reason to save them. So they would have been ripped off the journal or newspaper that was included and thrown out. So finding these is actually more difficult than any of the others. This one I find interesting because if you look at the Ghent cancel, this is the Ghent 3 post office cancel, probably the busiest of all the Ghent post offices. The date and month were inverted. Just a kind of interesting little mistake. This is a wrapper for an exposition for René Stevens' art. René Stevens was a Belgian impressionist and later one of the movers in the modern art movement in Belgium. He was born in 1858. Simple outer gem cancel on the right. I've just included information on the sizes of the post office. This is a second level, if we don't count the principal post offices, a slightly smaller post office. This is an example of what's called a fortune cancel. Following the war, of course, in an effort to get the Belgian Postal Authority back in charge and managing the people's ability to be able to send mail, the big issue was that a lot of the Belgian cancels had been destroyed, and nobody wanted to use the German cancels for obvious reasons. So fortune cancels basically were used as a way to cancel the stamp, and pretty much anything that could be used to do this was used, and this is known as a fork cancel. I would say it's most likely from early 1921. The piece of mail comes from Brussels. Brussels would have been at the top of the list to receive their cancellors as soon as possible, along with Antwerp, Ghent, and maybe Charleroi and Liège. So this has to be pretty early after the issuing of the stamp, because there's no reason that they would still be using this, I would say, after mid-year. This is the Brussels principal post office. You can see the preceding was sent from Brussels, the fortune cancel, but by June the 12th, the canceller had been replaced. This is a fascinating cancel. This is a railway cancel, six-sided hexagon, which would have been used in a railway station. And what's interesting about this one, and I have not found a lot of these, it's hard to read at the bottom, but it says Magasin Vérifié, which indicates that they have verified that this particular piece of mail actually conforms to the imprimé rate, and so is justified in the 3 centime rate. You'll see some examples later where that was not the case. Here's an Antwerp from the Antwerp 6 post office. Again, by September, Antwerp certainly had its cancellors replaced. I find this flam quite interesting. It's advertising the Dover Ostend packboat service. Most of the mail that came from North America went through the British Post Office and then was transferred by packboat to Belgium. At least it was going into the northern part of Europe. And so the Dover Ostend packboat service was a very vigorous service, running sometimes up to 4 times a day. Ostend is in the northwest corner of Belgium. Here's what I just think is a spectacular card. It's about elevators, of course, and this is demonstrating, I think, that again, principal post offices by halfway through the year had received their cancellors. And this one from the principal post office in Liège, Post Office 1. This is a smaller post office, a second-class post office. So again, what's interesting is to notice that by September, even smaller post offices had begun to have their cancellors replaced. I find this particular card really very interesting. There are a couple things on here that are that I think bear comment. You'll notice the auxiliary marking label in the middle. These were the UPU mandated labels that were mandated after 1892, and this is the 4th generation of these. If you look at the hand stamp on the right, the return to writer, you'll notice that the top line is in French, the lower line is in Dutch. The lower line is also not in as prominent a typeface. It has upper and lower case printing. This bothered people who were in the Walloon, in the Flemish region to the north, because they felt that their language, which had been given equality, was being considered a secondary language. So they came up with the idea that rather than having the French on the top and the Flemish on the bottom, or Dutch on the bottom, they would print them side by side. The problem, of course, is which language still has the prevalence on the left-hand side. It's the French language. So ultimately what they did was invert so that one language was facing up and the other was facing down. So regardless of which way you place the label, you could choose which one was going to be on the left, which I think is a really interesting solution. And that goes on then after the 1920s on. The little circles in the middle are postman's marks. I see Nick Martin on this today. Nick has been very helpful to me in my pursuit of information on Belgian philately. So Nick, hello. And I'm very grateful. Nick was the one that helped me understand that these are postman's marks. So 5 attempts were made to deliver this piece of mail before they had to understand that the person was unknown and there was no way to be able to get it to whoever it was addressed to. The imprimé rate on this one isn't really the big deal. What is the big deal is the fact that this partie and vertrokken auxiliary marking is actually quite rare. The person to whom this was addressed had moved without leaving a forwarding address, and so that's what that marking tells you. I hesitate to do self-promotion, but in the next LP, I have an article coming out on all of these hand stamps and mostly on the labels. So if you're not sick of it by the time this is over, you will be by the time you read that article. Here's a cancel from Malmedy. What's interesting about this is because Malmedy was a triple language location, primarily German speaking, this hand stamp is in 3 languages, which were only used in those days in the Eastern Cantons. And this is quite a not particularly rare, but I would say somewhat scarce cancel or auxiliary marking. Now, we move on to postcards. You could use the imprimé rate for postcards that had 5 or fewer words on them. And so these provide some really interesting examples, not only of the use, but also of people who didn't follow the guidelines. This is most likely an early cancel from the principal post office, the administrative post office in Ghent. And you'll notice that it's not a traditional cancel, again, because they didn't have their canceller. It conforms because there are only 3 words on the left-hand side. Here's another example. Maradre was a 3rd-class post office. Again, this is a straight line cancel that would have been from an earlier period, most likely from, I would say, from the end, even from the 19th century. That was probably laying around the office. Again, it's probably from early in 1921. There's some conjecture at this point as to whether the placing of the king's portrait upside down evokes a displeasure with the monarchy. There's no proof of that. Somebody was either just very careless or was making a political statement. This is a financial roller cancel. This would have been used if you put your stamps in a postal savings book at the post office to roll large amounts, cancel large amounts of stamps. Again, we don't know where this was from, but somebody had found a diamond roller cancel and decided to use it to cancel stamps because they didn't have any other options. I'm not 100% sure where this cancel comes from, what it was used for, and I would welcome anyone who wants to suggest what it may have been used for. It was suggested to me that it may have been a financial cancel, but again, it's early, probably 1921. Now, this is an interesting cancel. This is a relay cancel on the right. It's showing that that this was posted on the train that was heading north from Arlon to Brussels. And I'm not going to make an attempt to pronounce the town, which you can see to the left of that. Again, that's a straight line cancel that probably would have been a relic from an earlier day. And I'm not 100% sure why this would have been canceled both at the post office and on the train as well. Seems rather strange, but in any event, it's an interesting cancel. The Ostend post office, of course, was a first-class post office. In this case, the addressee was unknown and the card was returned. Had the card not been returned, and by the way, this is an interesting hand stamp because you'll notice the Dutch language is at the top and the French at the bottom. So in the North Flemish-speaking portion or Flemish area of Belgium, this kind of thing was already starting to happen. The card contained more than 5 words, so if it had been delivered, it would certainly have been hit with a postage due, but since it was returned, it was not. This card is sent at the imprimé rate of 5 words or less, but it contained more than 5 words. And so it was taxed or hit with a postage due charge at 2 times what would have been the 10 centime rate for a normal postcard. So as a double, it would have been 7 centimes times 2 and rounded up then to 15 centimes because there wasn't the proper amount to be able to make the 14 centime postage due charge. This is an interesting card because, again, it violates the imprimé rate rule of containing 5 words or less, but it was taxed as a letter, which is quite. I think this was left to the discretion of the individual post offices. Although I have seen people suggest that this was the legislation, I've never found out whether postcards that violated the imprimé rate were supposed to be taxed at the letter rate. So 12 centimes, it would have been a 15 centime letter at this point. 12 centimes times 2, rounded up to 25. This is an interesting card because it's an imprimé rate card that was sent out of country. The imprimé rate to Portugal should have been 10 centimes. 36 centavos was 18 centimes, which converts to 18 centavos, which converts to a 7 centime deficiency times 2. So it was hit with a 36 centavo postage due. I find this to be probably the most heartless example of this, the use of the 5-word rule that I have come across. I suppose the unsighted needed to conform as well, but this is a Braille card that has more than 5 words on it, and so therefore it was hit with a double postcard rate, and I think particularly heartless. Large-scale usages. This is an international double rate letter to England, rated at 50 centimes. What I find lovely about this is that it contains all 3 of the definitives that would have been used for the imprimé rate, and I, as a collector of the imprimé rate, I find it, somewhat lovely that that's the case. This is an international double letter rate to France. It should have been rated at 50 centimes, but it's 1 centime short, and I'm not really sure how it got through, but it did. Perhaps it was underweight, I don't know, and so therefore it didn't matter. I always find it interesting that the stamps on the front are canceled and the ones on the back are pen canceled. An ongoing battle that Canadians have with Canada Post is that many of our stamps are canceled with pen cancels today, which is very frustrating, but I find this actually quite interesting. This is an international rate letter that was going to Switzerland, and it's 25 centime appropriately posted. This is the largest known usage of this stamp, and it's international triple letter rate, 60 grams, to California, posted in June 1921. There's no date on the cancel. It should have been for 1 franc and 15 centimes. So it was 60 cents for a 60-gram letter and 50 cents for registration. So when you add all of these up, you end up with this being overpaid by 5 cents. It's a beautiful example of stamps that would have existed prior to World War I, and then the tin helmet, or the stamps of the very famous portrait of King Albert I, the tin helmet, which are the other stamps, which 1 and 2 centime versions of these as well. So it encapsulates, with the exception of that red cross, the 2 red cross stamps, most of what was happening right at the end of World War I. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, but I just wanted to show you that the 1920/21 King Albert the First 3 centime stamp was replaced very quickly by the Hoyu 3 centime stamp that you see at the right. The Hoyu issue is also generally looked down upon as a less than successful issue. These stamps were supposed to be the definitives to go along with the Montané larger value issues, which are some of the most spectacular stamps that Belgium ever released. But this was the replacement for the 3 centime King Albert, and it became the workhorse of the imprimé rate going forward from here. But as we know, the 3 centime, as part of the 1915 issue of King Albert I, was not demonetized until the 1934-35, and so they can be found as make-up rates on lots of individual postings into the 30s. So that concludes today's presentation. Please feel free to reach out with any information you might have, or if you have questions about this, and be happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. That was splendid. Have we got any questions in the chat, Mark?
We do, and I'm just about to come to that. Yes. Right. Yes, thank you, Greg. The let me see. Lars Butker has got some information for you, I think. You asked about that diamond-shaped cancellation with the 2 letters on it.
Yes.
From memory, was it ZL or something like that? Anyway, the point.
Yes. Yes.
He says that is a post office box cancel.
Oh.
In use when a carrier could mail an item during his round. And he says that they were in use since roughly 1850. So they were in use for a nice long time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you very much for that. That's really helpful.
Right, we've got a question here. I think, yes, this is from Ingo. Hello, Ingo, who you may know, Greg. You may know.
I do. Hi, Ingo.
Ingo's question is: do the 2 rare stamps on the right of the early slide have catalog status? Oh yes, you were talking about those rare ones, the ones that are on different color paper and so on. I think that's the point, isn't it, Ingo? Yeah.
No, they actually don't, Ingo. Let me just say that someone took issue with the fact that I said that this is the least researched issue. And they said, no, actually, that's not true. The 1915 King Albert I issue is one of the most researched issues, and that's true. This stamp is usually just tacked on at the end as what one writer has called an unfortunate mistake. So there hasn't been a lot of attention provided on that, but your question is, or to that. So your question is a good question, and one I think that maybe I should contact the catalog, the Belgie about, because they do exist, and I think it would be interesting to have them in there. So thank you for the prompt.
Okay.
Simon, that was the last of the questions that I'm seeing.
Okay. Well, I must admit, I do sort of wonder. I mean, there you are in Canada, and you're collecting all this Belgian material, and it's not the sort of material that comes up as single auction lots. So how do you find all this material?
I have a lot of people in Europe that are constantly on the lookout for me. which is really great. I find out a lot of things when people see them, but I have to be honest. I'm a Del Camp addict and a stamp auction network, and I probably have about 400 Belgian searches saved on my Del Camp account. So that's really how I find them. But a lot of the more interesting things come through people who are on the lookout for me and know what I like to collect.
It's very good. I mean, I think with this, we use the term inconsequential, and whether it's inconsequential philately, you've certainly shown that there's plenty of serious study to it, and a lot of research to be done. So I'd hope we all get some food for thought for it. Do you have a sort of category to exhibit these? In Australia, they have a sort of frugal category where you can show what might fall within this sort of category of material, and it can't cost more than so much money. And it makes for quite an interesting way of exhibiting.
No, we don't have a category like that, sadly, in Canada. But I mean, I would just enter it in traditional philately, and most. Although I have to say, the exhibit that I have of this won the single frame grand at one of our RPSC shows, so I don't want to demean it too much. But in most European virtual exhibits that I posted this in, it's been pretty much resolutely panned by everyone as not a particularly interesting or, as you say, an inconsequential topic. But that's okay. That's fine. I also judge. I'm a national judge. Just recently completed my apprenticeship in Canada, and I always say to people, show what it is you want to show, and exhibit it the way you want to exhibit it. So I'm never afraid to put in something like this. I think it's interesting, and exhibiting focuses my collecting, and that's why I do it.
Well, that's exactly what I tell people. Is why to exhibit. It does focus your collecting, stops you buying too many things. Your wife says to you, "What on earth have you bought that for?" No, I can focus. I can show exactly where it should go, and that's why I bought it. It makes a lot more sense. Now, Mark, I think you've probably got a certificate for us, hopefully.
I do. I will put it on the screen so we can see it.
So it's,
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Greg, it's a great pleasure to present you with the certificate. It is signed by the president, who, as you know, is not very well at the moment, but he should be back with us in a month or so. And we will be mailing, I think, the hard copy to you. That's what we normally do, isn't it, Mark?
That is, yes. I'm sure that the office will take care of that. Yes.
But we're also very much looking forward to welcoming quite a good cohort of your colleagues later on this month. So we're going to see quite a lot of Canadian philately, I think, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And really glad the Royal of Canada has embraced the Royal Challenge, and delighted that you've managed to show us this today. And I hope a few will go away and think, yes, do you know what? I've got the little nook or a cranny in my collection that I've never tried doing this way, but I ought to. I've spent a lot of time on it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.